You're listening to Boobies and Newbies. Find and follow Boobies and Newbies at Boobies Podcast across platforms and on boobiesandnewbies.com. And don't forget at Real Kelly Ray on TikTok, because TikTok thinks I'm making porn if I use boobies in the handle. Thanks, TikTok! Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and I'm pleased to say it's time for another Steamy Spotlight author interview. And this one is perfect for Pride Month. As you know, this podcast actively reviews and recommends LGBTQIA plus romance books every month of the year. However, as it is currently Pride Month, I am doing my damnedest to help you stock up those TBR lists with books written by and about the queer community. And for all of my Pride and Prejudice lovers out there, have I got a new one for you. But first things first, allow me to take a brief moment to remind you that you can always catch up on past episodes of the podcast on our website, boobiesandnewbies.com, or on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow Boobies and Newbies across social platforms at Boobies Podcast or at Real Kelly Ray on TikTok. If you're a fan of the podcast and you've got a few minutes to spare, I would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to be the first to know what we're reading next, have instant access to special events like our monthly Boobies Unlimited book club or our bi-monthly Tropes Are the Tits chat, and so much more, you might consider hopping on over to our Patreon page. And lastly, as this episode will be dropping in June as part of our Pride Month programming, I'd like to take a second to plug my latest project, Love is in the Air, a quick and dirty sapphic romance, which you will find in the Queer and Cute anthology releasing June 30th. This spicy short does have tie-ins to my first book, Meet Me in Los Feliz, though you can definitely read it on its own, as well as my next release, Venice Actually. But it doesn't stop there because there are over 30 contributing authors to this limited release anthology, writing everything from small town to hockey romance to a little bit of kinky monsters. And the best part is that all proceeds will go towards an organization that benefits and advocates for the rights of LGBTQIA plus individuals. I can't wait for you to read it. And again, as this is a limited release, you will want to grab yourself a copy because it's not going to be around forever. Now, as per usual, I will include links for all of the above in today's show notes. And now, please join me in welcoming the author of Just As You Are, a Pride and Prejudice inspired enemies to lovers romance, Camille Kellogg.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm so excited to have you. And first of all, as with every debut author, I have to say, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a wild couple of weeks, but it's so exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, I say it all the time, but I think just to write anything is an incredible feat. And then to actually go through the publishing process with it is an added stress and excitement unto itself. And what I think is really particularly interesting about you is that you actually work within the book world. You're an editor, although I think you work mostly with young adult and middle grade books, right?
Yes, I edit books for 8 to 12-year-olds and books for teenagers. So very different from the spicy adult rom-coms. We do YA rom-coms as well, but they are a little bit less spicy. So I work in publishing, and it's been very interesting to be on the other side of the process.
Oh, I'm sure. So color me curious. I would love to know what sparked your interest in writing adult romance, especially considering that you edit a completely different side of the publishing sphere.
I actually really like that I work in one genre and write in the other. I think it's a nice separation. It means I'm not only thinking about young adult books all the time, which I think would get a little bit tiring. It lets me feel fresh, jumping back and forth between the two of them. But I started writing romance because I love romance. Ever since I was a kid, I was obsessed with rom-coms in particular. I was one of those nerdy girls in high school who would get together with my group of other nerdy girls, and we never talked to any real boys. And every weekend we would watch some rom-com with Hugh Grant or Colin Firth, or we would cry over The Notebook. And my whole life have loved romance stories and just the characters and the satisfaction of watching them get together over and over again. But when I first came out as queer, I had a lot of trouble finding romance stories that I saw myself reflected in. And I particularly had a lot of trouble finding myself in movies. You know, there are a few sapphic movies out there, but there are not that many. And it's gotten better over the years. But when I first came out, it was hard to find anything, and it was hard to find anything good. So I started turning to books, and I started reading queer romance novels, and I loved being able to see myself in them and being able to see myself get a happy ending. And I decided I wanted to write that as well, and write something that also reflected my day-to-day experience. I think some of the romance novels I found were a little more fluffy, and I wanted something that focused on the harder parts as well as the fluffy parts, which I love.
Yeah, no, I love that too. It's so funny. I hate to like use the term real or realistic, but I think a lot of the romance that I tend to love are romances where you find the characters in situations or in relationships that are very reflective of at least like my real life experiences, or, you know, very similar to like the friend groups that I have. And so I think anytime we can see ourselves represented in romance, as well as just the world that we exist in represented in romance, all the better, because like you said, everybody deserves to see a happy ending for characters that look and sound like them.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about the realism and seeing your friend groups and your situations reflected. I think that's one of the biggest things I wanted to do with Just As You Are, is show the day-to-day experience of being queer. So many queer stories are about coming out or about these huge moments, but it's so powerful to see an everyday experience and to see an adult who has a full life and a community and strong friendships. When I was first coming out and I had no idea what it looked like to be queer, it would have meant a lot to me to just see someone living a normal life.
No, that's a great point. It's something that I feel like I've talked about on this podcast in a few different ways. We've talked about it as it applies to sexuality. We've talked about it in terms of characters of different races. I know for me, it's really important to write positive representations of fat characters, because like I'm a big girl. I love to see characters who look like me, who also are loving themselves and have people who love them too. And so, but it's interesting in that I feel like the common thread amongst a lot of these conversations that we have is that we don't necessarily want the entire story to be caught up in this specific identity, you know, whether we're talking about a fat person or a Black person or a queer person. And obviously there's intersectionality amongst those as well. But that doesn't have to be the trajectory of their entire story. It doesn't have to be a coming out story. It doesn't have to be, about them navigating the world as a person of a certain size. Like, they can also just exist in their world and also be that identity. It doesn't, not to say that I don't love a good coming out story and I don't love, to see stories that have discussions about race and gender and sexuality, but sometimes they can just be happy and they can just have the experiences that they're having and also happen to be queer, fat, BIPOC, whatever it might be.
Yes, exactly. I think I tried to do a mix of the two of those. On one hand, it's their everyday lives and their experience. And on the other hand, I tried to write the gayest book I possibly could. You may have noticed it has all these references to queer pop culture figures and references to queer websites and fashion brands. and everything. They're going to queer bars, they're going to queer parties.
Yes.
And I tried to just fit in all these different aspects of queer life and make this a book that is just as gay as the community that I have around me. And I had so much fun writing in all those parts.
I love that. And by the way, I think you should know, I don't know how much attention you pay to reviews, but I will say that when I was scanning Goodreads, there was verbatim a review that said, this might be the gayest book I've ever read. And I think they even said in parentheses, and I read a lot of gay books. So
That
mission
is the biggest
accomplished.
honor. That is really, I set out and thought, how can I write Pride and Prejudice in a way that is as gay as physically possible? And I'm so glad that it worked out.
It seems like you got your goal across. So good. There you go. Like I said, mission accomplished. Well, okay. Before we dive in deeper to Just As You Are, and we keep things relatively spoiler free on the podcast just in case people haven't had a chance to read it yet. But would you mind giving everyone a brief synopsis for your book?
I would love to. So Just As You Are is a contemporary retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It's about Liz Baker and her 3 roommates, all of whom work at the same queer magazine that is on the verge of being shut down. Until, at the last minute, it's bought by 2 wealthy lesbians. Liz immediately gets off on the wrong foot with one of the new owners, Daria, who comes in and starts making a lot of changes to cut costs. But the more time they're forced to spend together, the more they realize they might have more in common than they thought. It is definitely a romance, but it's also about queer community, queer identity, and celebrating queer culture.
Nice. I feel like you've given that synopsis before. It felt very, I mean this in the best way possible. It felt very well rehearsed. Like you've got it down.
Thank you. I hope it's not too rehearsed. It's a fine line. But
No.
People started asking me this, family, friends, people at the office. They'd say, oh, what's your book about? And I would be like, oh my God, I have no idea. It could be about anything. And then I would either say, oh, it's just about a girl. Or I would babble for 15 minutes and be like, okay, so there are these characters and they have these subplots. So I felt like I had to get my elevator pitch down just to get myself out of those awkward conversations.
Well, and I will say, look, that is a skill unto itself. And this is why anytime, I understand when people say like, oh, well, anybody can write a book. And I do. I agree. I think that's true. I think anybody can write a book. However, I don't think people understand how much other, let's just say it, bullshit goes into like when you do write a book that then you have to learn how to do marketing. You have to know how to do your elevator pitch. You have to like go on podcasts. You have to, there's so many things to it that I don't think people understand that goes beyond the writing, and the writing itself is freaking hard.
It's true. I think the hardest part of this whole process for me has been learning how to make Instagram graphics.
Okay.
Learning how to use Canva.
Maybe this should be a new question I ask on this podcast is, what's been the hardest experience for you so far?
You would think it would be the writing and the editing and the pitching, but no, I am not a very visual person. I don't have a strong design aesthetic. Mm-hmm. And having to put a pull quote into Canva and try and make a graphic I can share on Instagram is my worst nightmare.
It's so funny because I feel like every person I would talk to, and I've done over 200 episodes on this podcast. I feel like every person would say something different. That it would be different for every single person.
I think that's really true. There are just so many different aspects, and there are so many authors out there who are amazing at making Instagram graphics and who just pull them out, and their Instagram is full of them. And who might find some of the other things way harder, like the pitching or the editing.
Sending an email.
Yeah, sending an email. That can be so anxiety-provoking.
Yeah, no, I get it. Well, okay, so you mentioned Pride and Prejudice, which I, first of all, have to mention that I have a spreadsheet, and it's specifically dedicated to Pride and Prejudice retellings, adaptations, and when I tell you, I'm shocked every day. And you know what's so funny is there are so many across movies, books, TV shows. I've even got web series, podcasts on there, but yet they're all so different. They're all so different that even just in the world of romance, I feel like any Pride and Prejudice adaptation that I've read, the world itself that it's set in is so different compared to the others. And I think that's what makes it such a great story to use as inspiration, is that it's very much character driven, but the world is like flexible. And so depending on like what world you want to set it in, you know, and obviously we've got like the literary world, but also the queer community in this one, it's going to look very different from another version of Pride and Prejudice.
Absolutely. First of all, I have to say that spreadsheet sounds amazing. I kind of want a copy.
I'll send you a link.
Yes, especially if you have all the podcasts and the movies on it. Do you have a favorite adaptation or a couple favorites?
I will say, and I know it's such a like basic bitch answer, but like I really do love the Keira Knightley Matthew McFadden one. Like it's so good. And you know what's funny is I remember when it came out, I was in high school, and I think I might have been a freshman in high school, and we had this movie theater. I shouldn't even call it that. It's not what it was. It was an old church that they had turned into a one-room, one-screen movie theater, and there weren't even like movie theater seating. Like they had put in like couches and armchairs and bean bags. Cool. And we were in high school, and our English teacher, that's what we did for school one day, was we walked down to the theater and we watched Pride and Prejudice. And I remember it being like kind of the first time I saw something like that, like something that's, you know, both historical, but also like a literary adaptation, other than maybe like, I don't know, like Hunger Games or like something in the young adult variety, that I was like, I'm really into this. Like, I'm really, really loving this. And I don't think that's the typical audience for that, is a 14, 15-year-old, you know, and I definitely at the time was not the romance reader that I am now. And because I sort of got into romance because I loved rom-coms. I loved movies. Like, movies was always where my passions were. And then it kind of led into reading romance, because it was like reading rom-coms that I love to watch. But yeah, that's like one of my earliest memories when it comes to like something Jane Austen. And I think that's probably why it's still one of my favorites, is just like the nostalgia factor.
I totally agree. I love that movie so much. It's one of my top movies of all time. I saw it also when it came out. I think I was in middle school, and I was obsessed, and I had not read the book at that point. And I started slogging my way through the book, and a lot of it went over my head and I didn't understand, but I just loved the movie so much that I needed to read the book. And it became my favorite book. And I started reading it every single year. I reread it. And I watch the movie all the time whenever I'm sad or sick. It's just so good. Keira Knightley does such a good job of channeling Elizabeth Bennet. And the Mr. Darcy in that is the perfect mix of socially awkward, but still so compelling and handsome. I love that movie with all my heart.
The casting, like, all around is just impeccable. Well, and then in terms of something more recent, I will say one of my favorite books that I think I read at the beginning of this year that I think was like a great update and retelling of Pride and Prejudice is Nikki Payne's Pride and Protest. So freaking good. And just like, again, putting it in a modern context, but also adding in, you know, conversations about race and and politics. Like, I thought that was so well done, and I'm so excited to see what else she writes.
Yes, I've seen that book everywhere. It is at the top of my list. I fell down in my reading with all the book promotion stuff, but I'm so excited to read that one.
No, well, there you go. No, I could do a whole thing about recommending just not even Jane Austen, just Pride and Prejudice
So
retellings.
there are so many. It feels like every single culture or identity has at one point retold Pride and Prejudice because it's just such a classic love story. It's really the perfect formula for a love story, and it is so satisfying. You know what's going to happen, but it is so satisfying every single time, which to me is the mark of a great romance.
And I think that's what people love about it. And it's so funny because I think there are a lot of people who knock the romance genre in general because they look at it and say, it's too formulaic, or you already know how it's going to end, so what's the point? Whereas I think one of the things a lot of romance readers love is picking up a book knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what conundrums or misunderstandings or whatever happens, this is going to work out okay. There is going to be an HEA or at least an HFN at the end of this book, and they know that going in. And I think you can kind of apply the same principle to doing a retelling of something like Pride and Prejudice, where even if you haven't read the original story, I think so many people are familiar with it to some degree just because of how many different versions there have been. Like, they can hear Pride and Prejudice and know, oh, okay, this is like, there's the woman and there's the, well, doesn't have to be, there's the couple, and the Darcy character is, you know, the more guarded, the more, usually wealthy one of the two of them, and she's got her ideas about what that means and how the class difference plays into their relationship. So I think, again, like, you don't necessarily have to have read Pride and Prejudice to, like, read a Pride and Prejudice retelling and know, or at least have an idea of, like, what you can expect.
Right. And knowing what to expect, you can relax and enjoy the journey.
Yes!
And I love what you said earlier about how this story is so adaptable and you can put it into any world. And it's such a great vehicle for exploring a certain culture or a certain group, because you get characters like this in every single group all around the world. And it is so satisfying that they are characters who love to judge other people, but are themselves not perfect. And by interacting with each other, they realize their own faults and start to grow.
Yeah.
That is just such a magical thing because they are better together than they are apart. And it convinces the reader that they belong together, and it makes it so satisfying when they get together at the end.
So keeping in mind that Pride and Prejudice for sure has an influence on Just As You Are, something that I'm always curious about when authors do choose to do an adaptation or, you know, reimagining of a story is what liberties did you take with the original concept? Or, like, how did the characters change? Did you keep names of characters? Did you keep locations? So what does the Pride and Prejudice world look like in Just As You Are?
So in some ways I stuck close to the original, and in some ways I definitely deviated. So the heart of the story is these 4 roommates who live together. And I kept the names mostly the same. They're Liz, Jane, Katie, and Lydia. So close enough. Okay. I did have to cut the Mary roommates, character.
They're sisters.
Roommates, not sisters. And I really leaned into the found family idea. This idea that, you know, queer people tend to flock together and find people who love them and celebrate them for who they are. So I wanted this to be a found family rather than a blood family. But what was interesting is trying to recreate that feeling of being stuck together from the original. Because obviously in the original, they all live together, they're related by blood, and they also are economically forced to stay together because they're all women and they can't just move out of the house without husbands. So even if your sister is being so even if your sister is being embarrassing, you have to live with that and live with the repercussions of that on your reputation. So the way I decided to replicate that is having them both work together and live together. They all work at the same magazine, which is so messy. I don't think you should live with 3 of your coworkers. But they also go to the same bars, they go to the same parties, they know the same people. So they are really in one social situation.
You basically did forced proximity, but, like, with the friend group as opposed to like the relationship.
Yes, exactly. So I had a lot of fun developing that found family. To me, they're really the heart of the book, and they are always hanging out and bantering and talking about their crushes and their jobs and supporting each other. And their friend group is my favorite part of the book. The way I replicated the social situation with Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley is I had them come in and buy the magazine where they all work. And the magazine is called The Nether Fields, which when I figured out the name of the magazine, I was like, okay, this might actually work. I might actually be able to take Pride and Prejudice and make it set in New York and in the queer media world. Because that's obviously a play on Netherfield, the house Mr. Bingley buys.
I love that. That's, well, and it's so funny because I know that it's a play on Mr. Bingley's house, but then at the same time, I was like, whenever I hear nether, I think of like my mom saying like, your nether regions. And I'm like, oh, it's like a play on the name, but also like, you know, vaginas or like just
seemed to me like the perfect like 90s women's magazine name.
Yes. It's like I always think of it's it's such a random reference. I'm sorry, but I absolutely love the movie Best in Show. Have you seen it? About like the dog show and everything.
It's been a long time, but yes.
But at the end, the lesbian couple start a magazine called American Bitch. And it's about the lesbian purebred dog owner. And I was like, yes, this is it exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So niche, but I love it. Well, and I mean, I feel like so many people in the 90s, like we grew up reading and subscribing to like 8,000 magazines. Like, I mean, that was, and the quizzes and the blogs and the stories that you found in there. I feel like that at least my read of the book so far has like given me all these flashbacks to quizzes like that. And I know the more modern version of that would be something like BuzzFeed.
Do you remember, fully going off on a tangent here, in the teen magazines, readers would write in with their embarrassing moments.
Oh, yeah.
Always something that happened in front of their crush. I still remember so many of those.
Yeah.
They had such a deep impact on me growing up. You'd be like, life is bad, but at least I didn't fall in the pool in front of my crush with all my clothes on.
And then I also got my period. Yeah, no, those were so, I subscribed to like 17, Cosmo Girl. For a while, I don't even know why, because I'm the least fashionable person you'll ever meet, but I thought it was really cool to subscribe to Teen Vogue. And like, it just, but that was for sure like the 90s version of like going on to BuzzFeed and going on to Instagram today. Like it just is so I was definitely getting those vibes when I was reading it, and they're talking about like the different articles and quizzes and everything that like Liz has written for this magazine. It was definitely bringing me back to like my days of subscribing to magazines like that in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yes, I wanted to channel that BuzzFeed fun magazine energy. And I had a lot of fun coming up with the article topics, and all their conference rooms are named after queer icons. They have the Alison Bechdel bathroom and the Haley Kiyoko kitchen. The magazine, I had a lot of fun with bringing that to life and making it over the top gay and fun.
Yeah, honestly, it sounds like a fantastic workplace environment to me.
I agree. I don't think it's a great idea to live with all of your coworkers.
No.
Seems like
that I could do away
messy.
with, for sure.
But otherwise, I would love to work there.
Exactly. Well, and this is going to sound, maybe this will sound random, I don't know, but you have this really funny quote in the book. I wish I had written it down about if you have enough lesbians or queer people at a party, like somebody's bound to be vegan. And I thought it was, well, and what I loved about it was, it's so funny. I had literally just had a conversation with a friend of mine who was saying, because she's vegan, she feels like she never gets to read about characters who are vegan in her books. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm immediately going to tell her about this.
Oh my God, that's so funny. True, there is not a lot of vegan representation out there. Another area where people are being overlooked.
Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I love my meat and I love my cheese and I love my milk. So like, it's not me, but I just, as we said in the beginning, I want to see an accurate representation of everyone in books. I want to see people who, and that goes for like how you eat differently too, or how you do your hair. Like, I think it's great that we have so many stories that come out every year. And this is why whenever anybody tries to like gatekeep the idea of like bringing in like new authors or I don't know, like talk about like indie versus trad pub, to me, I'm just like, it's one more story. It's one more opportunity for somebody to be able to like give you a story that tells you or shows you and your friends and your family and whoever else it might be why wouldn't you want that?
That's actually why I went into publishing in the first place and went into children's books specifically. I think it's so important to be able to see yourself in books and see characters like you getting to be the hero and have adventures and misadventures and happy endings. Mm-hmm. And one of my focuses as an editor has been on underrepresented stories and people of different backgrounds and abilities and races and genders and sexualities. And it makes me so happy every time I see a review usually from a parent, because the kids are young, saying, my kid saw themselves in this book and they never read, but they read this book and they were so happy and they asked for more like it. And it just warms my heart. I think we all need to see ourselves.
People are asking for, and this is what drives me crazy about what's going on in our country today, mm-hmm. is just like this very misinformed narrative that's being pushed by certain people that's just, trying to exclude so many people from literally just existing. Like, it's not even a matter of like pushing an idea or trying to make somebody something they're not. It's literally just a matter of saying, this is who we are. We would love to see stories about ourselves and people like us and, show them to our kids and show them that, look, here's a story about somebody like you. Like, there's no harm in that whatsoever. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think excluding stories like that is way more harmful than the latter. I mean, it's insane that that's even a conversation that we're having. So, that's exactly why I always want to read more books and promote more books about characters who don't necessarily have my lived experience, because I think it makes you a well-rounded reader to read about other people's experiences and to talk with people in real life who have experiences like that as well.
I agree. I think the book bans are devastating.
Yeah.
I also think to show how powerful books are and how powerful stories are. And they can really empower people, and certain people don't want everyone to be empowered and to feel seen and valued. But if they're threatening our stories, means that these stories are important. And we need to keep fighting for them. And we need to keep writing them and promoting them and talking about them and reading them. And, as someone who works in publishing and as a writer, I think about this a lot. And I think we need to just keep going and not let them scare us into thinking, well, no one will want my story, so I'm not even going to bother writing it.
No, I'm so glad you said that. Actually, that I might be getting ahead of myself, but I feel like that might end up being part of your response for my next question. So Just As You Are has received some wonderful endorsements from a few of my favorite authors, some of whom have actually been on this podcast as well, Yay. Including Allison Cochran, Amy Spalding, and TJ Alexander. And I guess my question is, what do you think you've learned, both as a writer and as somebody who works in publishing, from these authors who are writing LGBTQIA plus romance, who have come before you, not that they've gone away by any means, and what's one thing that you might want other aspiring writers, especially those who are writing stories about the LGBTQIA community, to take from your book and your experience?
Excellent question. I love all of those authors so much. And there are so many amazing writers publishing today and making these rom-coms that I would never have even dreamed of as a kid or when I was first coming out. And it just feels so good every time you get to sit down with a book that you relate to. And even if it's not, your exact identity, but seeing yourself in the characters and seeing yourself in the stories feels so good. So I think I've learned from those authors just how important it is and how meaningful it is to me when I read those books. And I want to give readers that experience too and let them see themselves. One thing that this book goes into a lot is gender identity and the main character always feeling like she doesn't exactly know how to dress and present. And I've gotten some really amazing messages from readers who say, I didn't know other people felt like that. And I thought something was wrong with me and I was the only one who went through this. And that's how I felt too when I was first figuring all of this out. And it was books and the handful of movies and TV shows that exist that really showed me that I wasn't alone and that these are common experiences and make me part of a community instead of making me an isolated weirdo. So I think what writers should know is that your story is important. And I think it's really important to read really widely when you're trying to become a writer. I think the more you read, the better a writer you become. But I also think sometimes people get intimidated by reading books. You read the latest Emily Henry and you think, oh my God, I can never write like that. The banter is so top notch. I can't top that. And it can be really easy to feel like I'm not good enough. But I like to tell people, of course you're not going to be the next Emily Henry because you're going to be the next you. And you'll have different strengths and a different voice and it will sound different and feel different. And it's supposed to be. And we want all those different stories.
Yeah. Emily Henry is writing Emily Henry and Camille Kellogg is writing Camille Kellogg. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not to say that one person or one story is better than another because that's also very subjective. Everybody has their preference when it comes to writing style, writing tone. So there's no reason that all of these stories can't coexist.
It's so true. I will look at the Goodreads page for books that I love and adore and think are absolutely perfect. And there will be reviews that are like, this book is trash. The author should be ashamed. The publisher should be ashamed. Any reader who enjoyed this should be ashamed. And I'll be like, oh my God. And it just goes to show that everything is subjective. Readers like what they like and they hate what they hate. And you just got to write what you write and hope it finds at least some people who identify with it.
Well, and like you said, it's a great, I also teach, I teach creative writing at a university. And so I tell my students all the time, I'm like, because I think especially in that atmosphere, a lot of them are sharing their writing with somebody for the very first time are very nervous, very guarded. And what I always tell them is I'm like, you have to go into this understanding that you are not going to be for everyone. Not everyone is going to love everything you do. And that's okay, because if we all loved all the same things, it would be very boring. We would have the same oversaturated market of the same kind of story all the time. But you are also going to be somebody's favorite author. Like whatever you write, someone is going to love that. Whatever you're very passionate about, that passion is going to come through on the page and somebody is going to read that and also find this connection with either you or the words that you're saying. So I fully endorse this idea of like, whatever you want to write, put it out there and somebody else is going to love it. Someone will love it.
It's true. I love that. That's such a good pep talk. I wish I'd gotten that pep talk when I was studying creative writing.
Well, I mean, it took me forever, like, as somebody who writes, do I apply this same logic to myself all the time? Absolutely not. Of course I hold myself to an Emily Henry standard.
Everyone else should write what they write and be happy with who they are. But except for me, sucks. I need to hold myself to an impossible standard.
No, but you know what I have to say? I know we encourage writers not to read negative reviews, and I do agree with that. I think writers in general should just read no reviews, but I will say I actually love some of the 1- and 2-star reviews of my book because what people usually criticize are the things that I put in there very purposefully that are very much a representation of me. I've gotten the phrase aggressively feminist. I've gotten the phrase there's too much sex for Christmas. Like, it just...
Sex for Christmas. Oh my God, that's my new favorite quote.
There's been so many things that people have said that they're like, oh, it's too woke and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, I'm so glad you got the vibe. And you know what? You didn't like it because you don't like that vibe. But guess what? You still got what I was going for. So mission accomplished.
I love that. I feel like you need to be so confident in yourself, but that's actually such a good way to look at it and be like, I did what I set out to do. And these people hate it, but that's okay. Those aren't my people. But at least they're validating that I did what I wanted. I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, you know, and I know not you can't look at everything like that. And again, this is not me encouraging people to read negative or even positive reviews of your book. I think you should just write your book, put it out there, and let people digest it how they will. However, I will say, I do think your book is being very well received, especially by people within the queer community who are, you know, praising it for all of the references and, you know, the mention of queer icons that, you know, maybe not everybody knows, but that's okay. And it's this added, like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you're in on the club, you know, you're in on all the jokes that I've got to share that I think every community deserves to have when they're reading books. And guess what? If you don't get it, if you don't, you know, understand everything, that's okay. It wasn't for you. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully you don't need to understand every joke and every reference to enjoy the book. I will say my parents were like, "Ooh, I learned so much. What an educational story." in both, you know, a profound way, but also in my mom turned to me and was like, "So what is a butt plug?"
Thanks, Mom.
And I was like, "Oh, Mom, I cannot. I am so sorry." And she was like, "Oh, it's fine. I'll Google it." And I was like, "Don't. Don't do it."
I wish my mom would say she would just Google something. She just asks me what it is and, like, expects me to, like, explain it to her. Like, "Oh, Kelly, how do I do this?" Mom, have you Googled it? Have you looked it up first? Like, can I be your second resource? I would appreciate that.
She never Googles tech things, I will say. I am the #1 tech resource, which is funny because I'm a word person and have no tech skills.
That's just the position we've been put in as you know, millennials and Gen Zers. That's where we're at, whether we like it or not. But no, I think that's a great thing. And you know what? This is something that I actually talked about when TJ Alexander was on. We talked about how they had included sort of like this great, like a very, I don't want to say like educational, but like a very friendly way of reading, especially like things that you might not be as familiar with when it comes to non-binary and trans identities, but doing so in a non-preachy way, or doing so in a way that's like, I don't know if user-friendly is the word, just like a nice introduction, because TJ talked about how that was very much like their experience of like trying to explain it to people. And I think there's an interesting balance to navigate when it comes to talking about, you know, like you said, different ways to like present yourself and present your gender. And so I think you've done a great job, and I think people agree who have read it so far.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to get these reviews. I know on one hand, reading your reviews is such a bad idea, but the ones that really inspire me to keep going are the ones where people say, I felt seen by this book, and I saw an experience reflected on the page that I had never seen reflected before. And reading those reviews makes me think, you know what, it's worth it. All the hard work, all the editing, all the learning how to make Instagram graphics, it's really worth it. And connecting with readers is just so wonderful. And connecting with other authors is so wonderful too.
Absolutely. I think I felt seen is probably like the best compliment that I think, in my opinion, that an author could get. So
I agree.
It almost makes it worthwhile having to do the Instagram graphics.
Almost.
Almost. Well, maybe it's too soon to even think about it because like your book is just, out in the world as of, the end of April. But do you have any other projects planned at this time?
I actually do, yes. I have 2 more books coming out with the Dial Press, who published my first book. One is coming out in 2025, and it is a queer retelling of Notting Hill. It's about...
Stop it.
Yup. I'm so excited about this one because I love that movie and I love Hugh Grant so much.
Oh my God. Well, okay, first of all, I want to hear about your other thing, but we have to focus on this first because I have to tell you. So, Notting Hill is one of my all-time favorite movies, and as much as I love the romance, which I think the romance is fantastic, to me, the star of Notting Hill is the friend group, is their incredible friend group. Like, it's the same reason I love While You Were Sleeping. Like, those are the 2 movies I think of where I'm like, talk about an impeccable group of friends or family. Like, it's just, like, that is why I rewatch those movies over and over again.
Yes, the friend group in Notting Hill is so good, and they're so funny, good. But they love each other so much, and they're quirky, and they really are the heart of this movie, and Hugh Grant shines when he's with his friends, and I love writing friendships, and I love writing queer found families, which is part of why this movie called to me so much.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm not excited that I have to wait until 2025. However, I
know it's so far away.
I know. But you know what? The way that time goes, and especially when you're working on projects, like I've got like my entire 2024 like writing release schedule planned, and I'm like, that's a year away. Like, what are we doing? But it comes up so quickly, so I know it's far away, but it's not. So it'll be here. It'll be here before we know it.
Yes. The pub date seems far away. The due date does not.
There you go. Well, and then what else are you working on?
So once that book comes out, a year later, I'll have a 3rd book, which will be a retelling of something. I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
That is still open. So if anyone has anything they're dying to see retold in a queer way, my DMs are open.
Are you wedded to doing more Austen? Is there more Austen that you'd be interested in doing?
I would love to do an Emma retelling. That is the most interesting to me. I love all of her books so much, but Emma is just such a compelling, flawed character that I think it would be really fun to play with.
I think that's a good one. And one of my favorite retellings of Emma is Clueless. So I think a retelling of Clueless would also be great.
Yeah, it would be so funny. That would be very meta. The retelling of Clueless, that's a retelling of this.
It's a retelling of Emma. And then guess what? In it, they're doing a staged play of Emma. And it's just, I love when you get like those little like nods to whatever the source material is like within the new version.
Yes. It's like when you're watching a movie and they say the title out loud.
Yes!
That's my favorite. I'm always like, that's the title. That's the movie we're watching right now.
Talk about, especially, I know I just mentioned While You Were Sleeping, but it's the last line of the movie. I was like, whoa, we waited that entire movie for, it was while you were sleeping.
Boom, fade to black.
And it was worth it. Oh my gosh. Well, that sounds great. I know I'm open to, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think about what story would I like to see I'm assuming specifically like queer update too. Yes. And so I'm going to think on that because I feel like there are so many books and movies that come out where people will be like, you know what, this is great. You know what would have made it better if it was more gay? So I'm definitely going to think about that.
I feel that way about most books and movies. Just a little more gay.
You're not alone. You are not alone. Well, once again, I know we haven't mentioned it enough, but for everybody listening, the book is Just As You Are by Camille Kellogg. It is available now. I am also going to be giving away a copy along with a wonderful stack of LGBTQIA plus romance. I'll have the information on how to enter that giveaway on the Boobies and Newbies social media pages, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, this has been so much fun, Camille. I've so enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so great to talk to you about romance and Pride and Prejudice, and I am looking forward to getting your spreadsheet with all the adaptations.
Oh, it's coming. Just you wait. It's coming.
That's going to be my whole summer, working my way through every single one.
A Pride month indeed. I love it. Thanks so much for listening. Tune in every Friday for a brand new episode of Boobies and Newbies. And don't forget, you can always catch up on previous episodes on your favorite podcast app or on boobiesandnewbies.com. Happy reading!